Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. This video is a continuation of our observational drawing series where we're talking all about how to draw what you see. So far we have talked about value and lines and shapes and sizes. We've talked about texture. And then in today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to draw things that are transparent. That means you can see through them. So if I'm trying to draw something that's see-through, you might think, oh, well, it's invisible, so I'm done. I've already drawn. No, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. This bowl is this bowl. Notice, I'm trying to put this in the camera where the camera can see it. You notice there's like highlights, there's bright spots where these bright lights are shining on it. And then there's parts where you can, those are reflecting. And then there's areas where you can just completely see through it. A photograph will help more, okay? I'm leaving a link in the description if you want to print this photograph. Before we even put pencil to paper, let's analyze this photograph and kind of just make some observations, because after all, this is about observational drawing. We could make some observations about the shape and the size and things like that, which we'll do that in a minute. But first, let's make some observations about the surroundings. What's around this bowl? What's it on top of? What's it sitting on top of? What's behind it? Well, there's some striped fabric, right? And there's folds of that fabric, and it's, the fabric is under it, the fabric is behind it, the fabric is all around it, right? If we look at the bowl itself, we see this area right here is a bright highlight. And you notice that that bright highlight is just completely white. There is no detail of anything in there. That's where a glass surface is extremely reflective. Yes, you can see through it, but depending on the angle and the curvature of what direction that glass is facing, there will be a highlight where it's just reflecting, directly reflecting the light right at you, or in this case, right at the camera. There's a little bit of a highlight right here as well. It's not nearly as powerful as that highlight, and it's a sort of swoopy shape. There's another really powerful highlight right down here at the very bottom of the bowl, and it's just as bright white as that one. Then there's also a patch of a rounded, swooshy, almost like an upside-down Nike swoosh highlight right here that is on the inside of the bowl. If I look at the bowl here, it's this part of the bowl. It's the bottom of the bowl, but turned at a side where we're looking through this side of the bowl to see the inside of the bowl at the bottom. Anyway, also over here we're seeing a highlight that's not a highlight on the bowl. It's a highlight on the fabric being reflected through the bowl, or refracted. It's bending, the light is bending. Speaking of that, let's take a look at the way that these stripes of the fabric get distorted and bent and twisted in different directions. In the middle of the bowl, where we're looking straight through it, those stripes are kind of normal stripes. They're pretty straight. But over here on the edges, those stripes are twisted and bent at a really strong angle. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, I'm not going to try to draw every single stripe of the fabric. I'm not going to try to draw every single stripe of what I see reflected through the bowl here. I'm going to try to focus on just the bowl itself. So, let's get started with some basic shapes. Let's take a look at the top of the bowl. You notice how it's, if we're looking directly at the top of the bowl, it is a circle, but in perspective, On this picture, that looks like a very, very stretched out oval, right? I could measure it and say it's this wide, and then plop that measurement onto my paper and make it that wide. Or I could shrink things down and make my drawing a little smaller. But I think, honestly, it'll be a little easier for us if we try to keep things the same scale, the same size. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to measure. That's how wide the bowl is. That's how wide we're going to make the bowl here. It may not be exactly the same, but it'll be close enough. That's how tall that oval is. That's how tall that oval is. So the top of the bowl, from this corner to the top and the bottom, that oval shape is about this size. That's not a perfect rendition, but it's close enough. It at least gets me the starting point. It gets me the placement. Now I am going to darken that a little bit so the camera can see it better. You should probably keep yours lighter so that you can easily erase any parts that need to be erased, like right here. Right here, this part, we're not going to see it. There's like a big blobby highlight there. So I'm going to measure how far in that is. Let's see, I'm going to measure it this way. And then I'm going to measure how wide that is. It's that wide. And then I'm going to measure how tall it is. It's about that tall. And it's not quite circular. It's mostly circle, but then it's got this kind of squarish top right side. So I'm just going to kind of blob in that shape and get it close. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. And then I'm going to erase this line through here because you don't see anything at all inside that highlight, do you? So I don't see that edge of the bowl going through that highlight. That highlight is on both this side of the bowl and the other side of the bowl, and it just, that glare just reflected through. Okay. Next, I'm going to sort of get in, I guess I should get the bottom of the bowl before I start putting other highlights in the bowl. So I'm going to come to the middle here and kind of measure how tall is it from the top of the bowl to the bottom of the bowl. It's to here. And it's a pretty smooth, like semicircle kind of a curve. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball that, see if I can get it pretty close to right. That seems pretty good. And then the base, how wide is the base of the bowl? It's about that wide. And how tall is the base of the bowl? It's about like that. And the bottom of it follows pretty much the same curve as the bottom of the bowl part. Okay. So this gives us the basic structure of the bowl. It's time to start adding in the rest of these highlights. This highlight, these highlights on the inside. Then come back in and add shadows. We'll talk about those in a minute. So this basic swooshy highlight, I want to kind of copy that in this area. This highlight, I want to kind of copy in this area. And I'm just trying to get the shape of it, trying to kind of mimic how that shape has that sharp point that kind of comes off to the side. There's also little highlights, you know, underneath too, but we'll come back and get tiny little adjustment highlights later. We want to get the big ideas. So here we're seeing the inside of the bottom of the bowl, and that's about that high up. It looks a lot higher than it should be because the curvature of that bowl distorts and bends the light to make it look like it's in a different place. Just like my glasses. If you look at my eyes through my glasses, and then you look at my eyes not through my glasses, they look different, right? They're not quite the same size, they're not quite in the same placement. And it's because the glasses are curved, and so they bend light in different directions. It's the same way the bowl is doing. And so even though you would expect the bottom of the bowl to be lower down, like here with the base, it appears to be higher up because of the curvature of the bowl reflecting and refracting that light. There's like this sort of horizontal swoosh inside of there, and then underneath that, sort of two more little ovally highlights. And then there's these longer highlighty tendrils that come off to the side but aren't quite as bright, okay? Then also there's like a sort of highlighty area swooshing right here. And you could measure and try to get those placed in exactly where they are, or you could just kind of eyeball it and see a generalized idea of where they belong. And then this highlight, how it kind of swooshes in over here on this side. And it's got a funky shape to it. And so you're just doing your best to look for highlighted areas. We'll come back and talk about shadows in just a minute. So this kind of bubbly highlight is more of a highlight of something I'm seeing through the fabric, through the bowl. I'm seeing a highlight on the fabric behind it, but I'm going to go ahead and lightly pencil that in as well, just because. Okay, what about in this gap? I haven't done anything up in here. Do I see any bright highlights in here? I see a couple of little tendrils on the right-hand side, and over here on the left-hand side, I see some as well. So let's start with these smoky little tendrils. That kind of wisp their way up. And then on this side, there's a pretty clear line right here between a highlighted area and a shadow. Okay. I've done enough, I think, with highlights. I've already penciled in this shadow right here. When I start thinking about shadows, now I'm going to start with actually shading. Okay, I'm going to look at this value and compare it to other shadows and say, where's the darkest, the absolute darkest shadow on the bowl? Again, I'm not worried about the background. I'm not worried about the fabric, so I'm not going to worry about like this shadow down here between the folds of the fabric. But in the bowl itself, this part right here is the darkest shadow, right? So that's to the left of my highlight. I'm going to put that in its place. And if that's the darkest shadow on the bowl, well, I need to push hard and fill that as absolutely dark as I possibly can. If that's the darkest shadow, I want the full range of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 values. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, then you haven't been paying attention to this series on observational drawing. We did a video about value a couple weeks back where we talked about creating a value scale of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so then this shadow is almost as dark as that one, pretty much. So I'm not going to do quite a number 4 value here. I am going to be pushing it down, but I'm not quite going to be pushing as hard as I did for that one. Now again, like I said before, I am not concerned at this point with trying to draw every stripe of the fabric that I see through the bowl. I'm just looking for general values, okay? So here's what I mean by that. Like this area here, you can kind of barely see some of the stripes of the fabric, but really I'm just looking at that overall value as being like, it's pretty much a number 1. It's really light in there. And so at this point, I'm just gonna, it's like a color by number. I'm just trying to assess, trying to analyze. This is like a number 1 value, so I'm gonna shade it like a number 1. I might be pushing it down a little harder than I need to there. Probably, oh well. This little tiny lip of the bowl around that is darker, so I need to push that little tiny lip of the bowl around that a little darker. Okay, so I'm just looking one little thing at a time. Then that lip gets lighter as it comes this way. That lip of the bowl gets lighter as it comes this way. And then it kind of blurs with everything around it. This little space between the highlight and the shadow is a medium value. So this whole area in here. And I really want to take my time. I don't want to just scribble it. I want to figure out how to hold my pencil. My hand is not quite doing everything I tell it to do today. It's probably because I've been drawing too much. If you ever come across that problem where your hand starts to hurt because you're drawing too much, sometimes that starts way up here in the shoulder and you need to pull your shoulder back, straighten your neck, and not bend over so much. So sometimes you need to just scoot closer to your desk, keep your head up, and just tilt your eyes down and look down at what you're doing. Anyway, getting just one little value at a time. And so you can already start to see how this side of the bowl here goes from light to medium to dark, light to medium to dark. It's the same thing, okay? So just getting those major placements first of highlights and shadows. Now, I didn't really talk much about shadows in other places. The base of the bowl, there's another shadow, but I don't want to confuse myself between highlights and shadows. So what I do is I get all the basic highlights penciled in first, and then I just leave those areas white as I shade the rest. So at this point, I'm just like working across an area, across a zone, and saying, okay, what's next? After this shadow, then it's lighter again. It's going to be kind of a number 1, moving into a number 2, then back into a number 1. So it's like a number 1, moving into a number 2, and then back into a number 1. Let's finish that number 2 in between. And in the interest of giving a little bit more info before I just do the rest and then you see it when it's done, I'm going to finish by discussing every little value I see across this top part, and then you can kind of work on your own pace to get the bottom section. So from here, underneath that, that's sort of a number 2 value with a number 3 above it. Number 2 under here and a number 3 above it. So a number 2 value under here with a number 3 above it. And now I was looking here and I noticed that, yeah, it's a number 3 above it, but then it moves into a number 2 again and then into a number 3 again. This area right above the highlight I made a little too dark, so I'm going to use my eraser, but not push hard with my eraser. I'm going to be gentle with my eraser to just kind of lift up a little bit of that value. If you accidentally make something a little too dark, you have this tool at your disposal. Okay, now this highlight is like between a 0 and a 1. It's not pure white, but it's really light. So I'm gonna be absolutely very light in that little area. And then the same with this little highlighted area here and these little wispy bits that come up. But then the spaces between those are like a number 2 value. So I'm gonna push a little bit, get that to be slightly darker. And then again, slightly darker here between those wispy values. And then again, slightly darker here. And then the lip of the bowl. What does the lip of the bowl look like? It's kind of a number 1 value across here, but then a number 2 as it goes around the top. So I've got sort of a dark line there. I want to erase that dark line because it should be a very light, faint shading across here, and then get darker as it wraps around to the back side of the bowl. Anyway, so there you can see the top of the bowl. For transparent and reflective surfaces like a glass bowl here, the idea is the exact same as it is for literally anything else. All you're doing is looking for values. We've measured some sizes and shapes. We're looking for highlights. We're looking for shadows. We're looking for a value of 0, a value of 1, a value of 2, a value of 3, a value of 4. That's it. That's all there is to it. So it's really all about what you see, not about what you draw. It's all about what you see. I'm going to let you guys finish up the rest on your own time. I am going to time-lapse the rest of this so that you can just see what it's like when it's done, and then you guys finish it up on your own time. Okay, so guys, I know that that looked like it only took like, a minute or two because I did it in time lapse, but it actually took about, 10 or 15 minutes to go from there to there. What I'm doing now is I'm just using a finger to kind of smudge and blur and blend. There are some areas where, like my shading, I'm seeing lines in the shading, and if I'm just, smudge that with my finger, it blends it and makes it more smooth and makes it look more, like the glass is smooth. It doesn't look like it's got scratches across it, right? So I'm just kind of, that's one way to help get a smooth texture, is to just use a finger, and you can see my finger is starting to get, pencil dust on it. It's getting graphite on it, and that's fine. That washes off or wipes off real easy, and it's totally harmless. It's not going to hurt you in any way. But that just sort of helps to get a more smooth blend. And then if there are areas where I think it needs a little bit more contrast, I can push a little harder for darker. Like the bottom edge of this bowl is starting to disappear a little, so I'm just gonna work in that line a little darker, even though I don't actually really see a dark line like there in the picture there. Also, I had to make up some information because there's a little bit here where the the fabric goes in front of the base. So I just kind of made up some information there about what the shadows would look like there. And that leads me into the last thought here, which is that this does not have to look exactly perfectly 100% like the photograph. I mean, you as the artist are going to have to decide how much detail to put in, what shadows do you actually see, and what highlights do you actually see, and how big are those highlights and how big are those shadows, and how much contrast is there. All of that is stuff that you as the artist are going to have to see. And so I don't want you to try to copy everything exactly how I drew it. I want you to look at the picture and see what you see and copy what you see. Well, that's it for today. In this lesson, we talked about how to draw things and how really to see things that are transparent, that you can see through. In next week's lesson, we're going to talk about how to draw folds of fabric. I can't wait to see you then.